It is my pleasure to welcome everyone who is with us in person and online for tonight's book launch event, Force for Good, The Catholic Guide to Business Integrity, written by Dr. Brian England. Our first speaker is Dr. Andrew Abella, Provost at the Catholic University of America, who will give formal introductory remarks for Dr. Brian and Lauren Ashburn this evening. Dr. Abella is founding dean of the Bush School of Business and Economics at the Catholic University of America and author of A Catechism for Business and winner of the 2009 Novak Award, given for significant contributions to the study of the relationship between religion and economic liberty. And with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Abella.
I just clarify that founding dean, but no longer dean. I have to clarify that because the current dean is in the room, and he knows I'm always trying to get my job back. So I'll introduce Lauren first, who will be interviewing Dr. England. So Lauren Ashburn is managing editor and anchor for EWTN News Nightly with Lauren Ashburn. She was previously the White House correspondent and political director for EWTN News Nightly. And prior to joining EWTN, Lauren served as a contributor at Fox News Channel. She has developed and appeared in regular segments for PBS NewsHour, CBS This Morning, CNN, NBC News, Fox News Channel, MSNBC, and others as a political and media analyst. So Lauren will be interviewing Dr. England on his new book, A Force for Good. We're delighted to have you, Lauren. Thank you for doing this. What can I say about Dr. Brian England? So you know that when people give long introductions, bios, those bios are usually written by the person they're introducing, and then you just to read them. That's not the case here. I wrote this myself because I want this to be a testament of my appreciation for the author. So Dr. Brian England is Ordinary Professor of Marketing at the Bush School of Business and Economics at the Catholic University of America. He joined our faculty in 2010, capping a distinguished career in both academic and professional practice. Dr. England's research focuses on how marketing executives think, or how they process inputs in marketing decisions about how to market products and services, and he investigates decision-making processes in the light of ethics and the virtues of a marketing manager. Dr. England has authored over 70 refereed publications. He has won multiple teaching awards, has been named as a fellow of the Marketing Management Association. He's been president of not one but two of the 3 scholarly marketing associations in this country, and received the Lifetime Contributor to Marketing Award by the Society for Marketing Advances, one of those 3. He is the co-author of 6 books now, including his earlier Ethics Essentials for Business Leaders, the Council of Logistics Management Toolbox, and 3 other marketing anthologies. Prior to his career in academics, Dr. England was a product development executive and served in a series of leadership positions for 2 Fortune 500 corporations, American Cyanamid, which is now part of Pfizer, and Elja Industries, which is now part of American Standard. Later, he became president of a marketing consultancy agency, England and Associates, which helped clients successfully introduce over 300 new products and services. One product that he developed and introduced for the Formica Corporation created over $500 million in new revenues and was a featured new product displayed at both the Smithsonian Institution here in D.C. and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Dr. England holds a bachelor's degree from Purdue University, an MBA from the University of Cincinnati, and a doctorate from Southern Illinois University. Before joining our faculty, he served as the marketing department head at Mississippi State University. Dr. England and his wife Barbara, also here, are enthusiastic supporters of Catholic education. All 3 of their all 3 of their children earned degrees from Catholic high schools and colleges, and their son graduated from Catholic University with a PhD in philosophy in 2005. Their youngest daughter is a cloistered Carmelite nun living at the Carmel in Flemington, New Jersey. Dr. England is a 4th degree Knight of Columbus, was Sir Knight of the Year for the state of Mississippi in 2008. He is also a Knight Commander in the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. Amidst these many achievements, there's still more that I want to say about Dr. England. And that is, and I believe that everyone who knows him well would say the same thing, that Dr. England is one of the finest human beings I have ever met. I had the pleasure of overseeing Dr. England's application to ordinary professor, which involved soliciting letters of recommendation from other noted scholars. What amazed me was not just the profound respect that these scholars had for his work. In every case, both those who knew him well and those who knew him by academic reputation only, not just this respect for his academic competence, but also what a tremendous appreciation they all had for what a wonderful man he is. One leading marketing scholar wrote of Dr. England, quote, "I have had the opportunity to observe as well as work with many individuals in my over 35 years as a college professor and administrator, and can state without reservation that Brian is one of the most intelligent, hardworking, and dedicated individuals I have known," end quote. Another leading scholar wrote, quote, "What seems to sum up Professor England best is that he is the embodiment of the golden rule. He treats people as he would like to be treated, with a high level of respect and empathy for all. He is easygoing, seeks excellence from all those he works with, yet finds the good in everyone around him," end quote. I want to close on a more personal note. The last time I had the pleasure of formally introducing Dr. England was on the occasion of his receiving the prestigious Prisbler Chair in December 2014 at Catholic University. I and everyone there honestly thought that we were saying goodbye to Dr. England at that point. He had lymphoma, which is a stage 4 cancer, and had lost so much weight he could barely stand. And so we were giving him this chair and thinking this is an honorary thing and he would be leaving us. By the prayers of many and by the perseverance of his delightful wife, who dragged him down to North Carolina for some experimental therapies, he was cured. It wasn't miraculous because there was a medical explanation, but it was certainly a most glorious healing and most unexpected. So within months, literally within months, he was back in class teaching and has since been able to write this wonderful book. So we thank God for the life of Dr. Brian England. We thank God for his book, and I introduce you Dr. Brian England. Come on down.
Thank you very much, Andrew. My goodness, that was impressive, I think. I was trying to figure out who he was talking about and all that. Okay, how do we do this? I think it's Lauren. Okay, where would you like to? All right, very good. Before we start, I do want to thank everyone for coming, and I do want to say that to Father that this does seem like a homecoming of sorts. My daughter, that Andrew explained, is a Carmelite nun up in Flemington, New Jersey. She worked here at the Catholic Information Center in 2000 through 2002. So she's a good alum of this program, and so it's a pleasure to be back.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn, as you heard earlier, and I am delighted to have a nice casual fireside chat, shall we say, with the ordinary professor, who I guarantee is nothing ordinary and has written an extraordinary book. So thank you so much. The book is A Force for Good, The Catholic Guide to Business Integrity. In the beginning of this book, sir, you say that you and some friends were getting together to start a company. And you quickly realized this company that you wanted to start was a company that didn't have the values of those big corporations. They weren't short-term values. They weren't going to be doing this company to make money. You say, our vision was to create a business that overcame the short-term mentality of the major companies we had worked for. We wanted to run this business in the right way, a way that developed customer loyalty and commitment. And that's page 3. By page 4, we couldn't make the monthly cash flow numbers to keep the banks happy, so we had to apply the short-term mentality. So why should we listen to you about ethics in business?
Now, that's a difficult question, I think. And that was a very intriguing experience for me, because I learned a great deal from that. The 4 partners, I should say 3 partners and myself, all of us went to church together. So this is a group of Catholics. we thought we were of the same mind in terms of Catholic values, but it turned out that was not the case. And in fact, when we got to the point of trying to make the numbers happen, and we got into a rough spot, unfortunately, I couldn't convince the others that what we were doing was not ethical. And I point out that what you do is you learn from those mistakes.
And
I call it scar tissue. Is that the word?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. And I think it's a kind of an interesting idea, the whole thing, because I know that children listen to their parents sometimes, and the parent says, "Don't touch the stove; that's hot," And what do we do as kids? Touch it anyway. And then when we get burned, we pick up this whole idea that the parents are right, and there are certain ways to do things, and there are right ways and there are wrong ways. And
You're on.
Am I in?
Yes.
Is this working? Good. I'm sorry. Okay. And I think I can recall on several occasions I got some scars here on my knee from one time that I did something wrong, and of course I remember climbing in a tree and falling and breaking my arm, and so you pick up scar tissue, but hopefully I've learned that being a good professor, you can relate these things and then help the future generation to sort through these so that they don't make the same mistake.
And that's where the rubber meets the road. There are so many people in ivory towers who can say this is how business is supposed to be done in order to be a force for good. But there are those like yourself who have actually tried to make that happen. I'm wondering if for this audience, since I highlighted a failure in the beginning, which you do in your book, I will say, if you could give us a success of a time when you were at MCI, for example, of how you were able to keep your values true to the Catholic business integrity model.
Now, Lauren, I was not at MCI. The story that we were talking about
MCI,
there was
right, is the one that you're saying, right.
But I will tell that story because I think it's a very, very intriguing thing. And again, that was a learning experience. MCI WorldCom, of course, at one point in time was the largest telecommunications firm in the country. And Bernie Ebbers was the leader, and he was very much a basketball coach kind of a guy that really was thinking that he was great at getting everyone excited about achieving high goals. And I remember that as a professor at this point in time, studying how people think in businesses, I had the opportunity to attend their regional meeting. When I say regional meeting, it was a quarterly meeting. So they had about 25 divisions at this point in time, and we had marketing managers from each division giving their quarterly reports. And this was in a big ballroom. And so I'm sitting there listening to what's going on. And it was very peculiar because an individual would have their PowerPoint presentation, talk about the goals that had been set for their division, then how well they achieved them. And when they achieved all the 5 goals, then everybody would stand up and cheer. They would sit down, and the next person would get up. But if they didn't achieve one of the goals or didn't achieve 2 of the goals, then what would happen? It was kind of a groan type of a thing in the room. And their boss would stand up and give them a tongue lashing. This is unacceptable performance. This cannot happen again. If this happens again, then you're a goner. You've got to do better, etc. And I thought, wow, this is really a difficult kind of environment to put somebody through. And what's this all about? I asked my host, and he said, what we're doing is instilling the virtue of goal orientation. Because someone who's gone through this experience, they see what the positive goal things is and the accolades they get, and the ones that get the tongue lashing when they don't achieve those, they're not going to miss their goals in the future, was the idea. And I was thinking, wow, this is something doesn't seem to be right about this whole thing. And it was interesting because about a year after this is when it came out that Bernie Ebbers was cooking the books because he had a goal of making sure that the numbers every quarter met the numbers for the overall corporation. And when they didn't, he couldn't let it go. I mean, he had to make that work, so he cheated. Mm-hmm. And gosh, I in my idea on this, it seems to me that we know that the cardinal virtues are the most important virtues in business. And when you somehow put goal orientation over all the others, it's a misplacement of the priorities. So I think it's really important to be truthful first. And I think that's the overriding virtue for this, truth.
For businesses to act ethically, to be true, how far should they go when it comes to making profits versus taking care of their employees? In other words, how do you balance it? How does someone balance making a profit for good when there are times when you need to lay off folks in order to make that profit?
Certainly, and the church talks about the role of profit in business very effectively. And the idea is that, profits are like breathing for a human person. It's necessary. If you're a profit-making business, if you don't make money, you're not going to last very long. If you don't breathe, you're not going to last very long as a human being either. But it's not about this idea that my goal in life is to breathe as deeply and as much air as I possibly can, because there are so many other things that we as humans want to accomplish. So our role is not just to breathe. It's to do all of these other things, and the same thing is true in business. It's not the goal of business just to make money, but it's to serve customers. It's to create effective challenges and opportunities for employees to grow in their own abilities, and certainly to make the world a better place. So that's really what a business is all about.
When Pope Francis came here in 2015, I was lucky enough to be helping with communications on that and heard him give a speech to Congress. And he proclaimed in that speech that business is a noble vocation. So if God is calling us to do something noble, which is to go to work, and to be a certain type of employee or worker. You have a calling to be a TV anchor, or a TV news person. You have a calling to be a professor. Aren't there people who just have to work to make money?
I think it's absolutely the case that some people, we have to have all of the elements of life, and so we do need to be productive and work. And certainly the encyclicals are very explicit about the fact that individuals need to work. Not only do they need to work to bring in the money to cover the expenses of life, but they need to work to grow as an individual, because we do grow in terms of relationships with others.
But I think what I'm getting at is that not everybody can think noble. I'm going to be noble today, and I'm going to go out and work. I just need to get in there, I need to make the money, and I need to go home. And I think that's the mindset of a lot of the working poor and a lot of other people, the middle class, some of whom are forgotten in loftier discussions about good in business.
And I know that Gallup poll has done some work recently where they suggest that only 30% of people are actually engaged in their work. Their mind is someplace else. They're in situations that they don't like what they're doing. They're in situations where their boss is not someone that they like, admire, or are actually involved. And I think this is a real challenge. And I think being a force for good means that one must also be a good manager and treat employees effectively and pay attention to employees and give them challenges that help them grow and make them or allow them to be actively engaged in the work.
What I found interesting about that is that you have very specific ideas and guidelines for people who are going to work every day and may not be as engaged as they are, and you give reflections in your book that can help the everyday person. And I think it would be interesting for the audience here. Say, Elena Acela is our segment producer who helped me put some of these questions together. How can Elena or Anna, who also works in our office, or Kathleen, or anyone else at Catholic, give me something concrete and tangible that each person tomorrow can go into work to do that will help make this force for good where they work?
So I think what I would do, since force for good really requires some understanding of the core principles of Catholic social teaching. So I think what I would do is I would ask you, before you go to work tomorrow, bone up a little bit in terms of the 4 core principles of Catholic social teaching, and then ask yourself, how can I apply these more effectively in my workplace?
Let's go through them. Subsidiarity, which I think trips up a lot of people. First of all, many people can't even say it. We were going through that in our office today. Someone kept tripping over subsidiarity. What is subsidiarity, and why is that important for Catholics to know and to apply at work?
And that is the most difficult one, and that's the one that most people really don't understand very well. And if you read the encyclicals, you get the idea that, well, they must be talking about governments and local governments and national governments. And
how things begin locally.
At times, should the federal government do something and the state government not do it, and that kind of thing. But the concept, as applied, not as applied, but as alluded to in Pope Leo's Rerum Novarum, really relates to all sorts of situations where there is an individual and someone at a higher level. And the idea is that that individual has a certain responsibility in their job or in their workplace. And that is a responsibility that shouldn't be messed with by another level of the organization, because that individual needs to be able to take ownership for it. See, we were created in God's image. God is this great creator. We want to be little creators in our own. And consequently, we really enjoy this whole idea of having a space of our own. This is our responsibility, by gosh. We're going to do this. And when somebody is constantly looking over the shoulder and say, oh, no, you don't. No. I mean, it's the kind of thing like, oh, this doesn't work very well. The boss this is a boss that I don't like.
So it's micromanaging, is what you're saying. Don't micromanage, lesson number 1. Is that true?
That's true.
All right, keep going with Catholic social teaching.
All righty. So human dignity is this whole idea, that people are the most important thing that we have. It's the most important thing that the business has, and they are number one. People are number one. So if that's the case, then we got to pay attention to those people and listen to what they have to say, and put them in situations that they can prosper and be effective, and do all of that in a way that we're serving customers effectively and making some impact on the world in a favorable way. Then there's solidarity. Solidarity is what we call the teamwork principle.
Where everybody goes out for a smoke break together? No?
Right. Well, the idea about teamwork is that you need to back up your teammates. And my daughter at Carmel, the monasteries run this very well, because everybody rotates through all of the jobs so that everybody knows everybody else's job. So that way, if somebody is sick or ill or something like that, the work gets done because you can make the switch and the change. Mm-hmm. But not only that, if I know your job and your job and your job, I can see how my job relates to what you have to do much better, and I can respect the needs that you have, but I can also make suggestions on how what you do can help with what I have to get done.
It's a holistic approach.
So as a result of this whole thing, we end up with lots of innovation, and we end up with businesses that really work. So that's solidarity. Then common good, I think, is also one that's very much misunderstood at times. And there's a story that I give in the book about my dad, and this is going back way a long time ago, but when I was a teenager, my dad was an entrepreneur, and he had a heating and air conditioning business, residential heating and air conditioning business. So I remember one time I carried the tools, and I went out on a service call, and it was a situation where it was one of the wealthier families in town, and their furnace wasn't working, and my dad figured out what was wrong with it, and it was going to be a $25 bill, and the owner of the house told my dad, well, I don't want it fixed. Give me a price on a new unit. I want a new one. And my dad says, a new unit? No, this is good. All we need to do is fix this one thing. It's going to last another 20 years. You don't need a new one. And he said, well, I buy a new car every year. I got money. Why shouldn't I buy a new furnace? I want a new furnace. Give me a price on a new furnace. And my dad said, I'm not going to give you a price. I'm not going to sell you a furnace. And he walked out. And so I'm riding home with my dad, and I'm realizing, well, Dad, don't you want to sell something? Why don't you want to sell something to this? Mm-hmm. My dad said, you know, it's wrong to sell something that someone doesn't need. Have you ever gotten that from a salesperson? Have you ever been to a store and they said, no, you don't need this, I'm not selling it?
I was thinking Chia Pet. Nobody needs a Chia Pet, really. Right?
But there's something to be said about this in terms of the common good. Because if everybody bought things they don't need, what happens? We fill up the dumps, and we fill up our garages, basements, attics with all sorts of things that we don't need. Meanwhile, there are people that need things that don't have the residual money to do things in life that are needed. So this idea of being on the common good means being really honest with your customers so that you don't sell them things that they don't need.
Those 4 principles, I think, are very clear for us to understand and to take into our daily workplaces. You write about natural law and the 10 Commandments, and that you say that organizations, no matter what their purpose, should observe the natural law. I think that's a hard pill for people in business to swallow, especially if they're not faithful, if they're agnostic, or if they are atheist. So how can companies that don't have belief systems like ours implement this mechanism?
Really good question. So natural law is this idea that humans have certain characteristics that we have in common. That because of the way that we were created, because of our DNA, we like truth, we like beauty, we like goodness. And we don't like situations when somebody lies to us, or when something really gets ugly, or when something is not good, it's just done badly. And because those are natural human characteristics, it makes sense for businesses to observe them. Now, the easiest way to talk about the natural law is to think about it from the standpoint of the second tablet of the 10 Commandments. And you recall that when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he carried 2 tablets. One of the tablets apparently talked about what we were to do to show our love for the Creator. The other tablet was to tell us what to do to show love for our fellow man. This second tablet, the latter part of the commandments, tell us don't lie, don't steal, don't kill, obey authority, and don't put your mind or your sets on something that your neighbor has. I mean, this idea of covetousness. All of those are appropriate standards for any business, and they transcend all religion and non-religion, because even the atheist says, yeah, all right, truth is a good one. Yeah, stealing, no, not good. Killing, not good. So these are basic moral precepts that all businesses need to observe. But that's not enough. If you're a Catholic, and of course Catholics have the benefit of all of the thinking of the great saints and the theologians and our popes over the years, I point out in the book there needs to be three things that we need to pay attention to. Not only do you pay attention to the Catholic social doctrine, pay attention to this natural law thing, the basics, but also virtue. And the great thing about virtue is, my gosh, that's the original continuous improvement approach. All businesses talk about continuous improvement. Well, virtues, this whole idea of growing in virtue, improving so that you develop habitual responses to situations to do the right thing. These are very important, and businesses can have virtue as well.
Habitual responses to doing the right thing. I think you need to expand on that a little bit.
Okay. So the first time you always do something, you have to think about it, you analyze it, and all that kind of stuff, and it's a big issue, But then the second time, you can remember, hey, I did it this way last time, it worked, or it didn't work, I'm going to change it this time. The third time, it gives me, and then for the fourth time, you don't even have to think about it. It's the kind of thing that just, it becomes a habit. Doing the right thing in this situation becomes a habit. What you want to do is create situations where your whole organization does the right thing. First time, second time, third time, every day. Whether it's in season or out of season, or even when the going gets tough.
And for those who are managers here, how do you create and foster an environment where that can happen? Where everybody can do the right thing all the time?
Well, you need to have two things. First of all, you've got to have everyone that understands what the standards are for the organization. And then the second thing that you need is you need to have systems set up so that it assures and ensures and backs up and supports individuals who do the right thing, even in the difficult situations.
Let's move to salary. Salary is always, I think, an interesting topic simply because an employee always wants to get paid what they think they are worth, and rightly so. But there are many employees, CEOs especially, who believe that their salaries should be quadruple, quintuple, 100 times more than other workers, even when the businesses are not doing well. Are differences of that scale in pay ethical?
That's a really interesting question, too. If you go to Scripture and you look at the parable of the talents, it's a situation where some people were given 10 talents and some people were given 1. The idea is that the one that gets 10 better do something very good with it. From those who are given much is expected. There's another parable, and this is a parable regarding the workers. The worker who is called to the vineyard the very first early in the morning and works all day in the hot sun gets the normal daily wage. Well, the ones that come and join at noon, they get the full wage too, and the ones that came at 3 o'clock get the full wage. And those that only worked an hour at the end of the day, they get the full wage. So if you boil this down to wage per hour, somebody's getting 8 or 10 times as much as somebody else. So Scripture seems to recognize that there are situations where we have differences in pay. If you apply Catholic social teaching, the 4 core principles, you can help you discern whether or not it's fair to get these different wages. For instance, human dignity would argue, especially, when you're talking about the CEO who's getting 100 or 150 times what this floor sweeper is getting.
Or LeBron James or a basketball star.
A basketball star or movie stars that get, they're the ones that are getting the box office thing. Catholic social teaching recognizes that not everybody can get the same pay, or it's licit for people to get different, provided that there is some justification. And the kinds of justification has to do with if the job requires a tremendous amount of talent, if you're the star quarterback of the NFL champion, probably deserves more pay than the lineman who is on a different team, for instance. There's a recognition that skill and talent and work capability gets paid differently. And that really kind of ties into this idea of subsidiarity, that if you have greater skills than somebody else and you are doing a better job than somebody else, then it's appropriate for you to earn more dollars. Well,
if I go back to the
Yeah.
parable, if I may, I think
Okay.
this was a Sunday gospel maybe a month and a half ago. There's a flip side to it, right? Well, Catholic social teaching must say, yes, there is this disparity in payment. The homily that I heard that Sunday talked about the person who came in and worked for an hour and got the same pay, and that the person who had been working all day complained and was bitter and was angry that the landowner would give the same amount of money to that person. And it really became a story of greed, right? These people wanted to make more money because they worked longer and harder. And the landowner said, why would you begrudge me my charity? Mm-hmm. Why would you get upset with me because of that? It brings in greed into the workplace as one of the major issues that need to be dealt with in corporate America. Mm-hmm. And my question to you is, how do not just corporate CEOs, but how do the little people stop this constant desire for more money and money and money and money?
I don't think you should stop the desire for more money, but I think that there are ways for you to understand that God gives, and all the gifts that you receive are true gifts from God. And I think it's one of the challenges that we all have in understanding who we are, to understand that, gee, I wasn't given this tremendous ability to do public speaking. I just kind of try to get by. You recognize that God gave you other talents, and those talents help you do the kinds of things that He is calling us to do in this world. So as a Christian, I don't think it's as big of a problem as it would be for someone who has no faith. If one has no faith and looks at this world as being the be-all and end-all, the final thing, then I think their concern is to grab all the gusto as they can. It's that bumper sticker, he who gathers the most toys by the time he dies wins. And we all recognize that, boy, that's a really stupid thing. It's a joke. And then you realize, it is a joke. What we're called to do is something very different in this world. We are called to a sacrificial love for our fellow men. And I think that is, in the nutshell, it's a different kind of an idea. Yes.
So next week is Thanksgiving, and then comes Black Friday. I don't know of a lot of sacrificial love that goes on Black Friday when you're walking into a retail store. Let's talk about the outdoor retail shop REI and their Black Friday policy and how this ties into Catholic social teaching.
Certainly. REI is a very interesting company. Of course, they sell outdoor equipment, and they really try to get people excited about camping and enjoying the outdoors. And I think it was 2 years ago now, maybe 3 at this point, where they decided that what they were going to do is not participate in Black Friday sales the day after Thanksgiving. In fact, they closed their stores that day. And everybody asked, how in the world can you close your store on the biggest retail day in the year? And what they said was, we think that this idea of Black Friday sales is getting out of hand. And I know that I've got some relatives that, stay up all night long, and they go out, go into all of the store. They get 5 stores in over, in the middle of the night, and they come back with all of these bargains, and it's a real game. There's a great deal of enthusiasm to do that kind of thing, but it really does add to this notion of materialism, that somehow our satisfaction is tied to the things that we can buy. And that's not a very Christian idea to the whole thing. So in the case of REI, what they're doing is they're sending their employees out on day off, be outdoors. And they're telling their customers, don't come in here looking for bargains on Black Friday. Go out and enjoy the outdoors. And then once you've enjoyed the outdoors, come on back and buy some product.
Buy.
So in some respects, it's a little bit of I guess you'd say, it's a marketing stunt. But I think if more people would do things like that, we might be able to curb some of this excess that we have in terms of materialism.
You talked about the environment, people going outdoors. That's a perfect transition to Laudato Si, wouldn't you say? Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si, in it he wrote that part of the problem with the environment is due to failure to recognize the primacy of human beings. What obligations do businesses have to protect the environment?
So certainly Laudato Si pointed out kind of almost a game changer, because what Pope Francis suggested in this thing is that remember why we're concerned about the environment. We're concerned about the environment because it's the home, it's our common home. And if we want people to flourish, then we need to have an environment that allows them to flourish in. And if we have an environment that has the pollution and that kind of stuff in it, it's a real problem for people to flourish. So he kind of called us back to this whole idea. The reason we're doing this is because we want this place to work for people, not because we're concerned about some species not surviving, or not because we're concerned about other issues, And he said basically what we need to do is really look at everything, not just the science, but let's look at the economics involved in trying to do some of these things to clean the environment up. And let's look at the culture, because a lot of it is culture that relates to this idea of a throwaway society. And let's also look at the social concerns that are involved in doing all of this. So businesses do have a responsibility to pay attention to the common good. And if they are polluting, they need to kind of back off and figure out, isn't there a way that we can provide the benefit of our product without soiling the environment as much as we are doing?
Business leaders are asked every day to make executive decisions just like that one. How do we do that? How do we scale back polluting and instead lose some profits because we have to implement or put in some new machinery, et cetera? They make those decisions in order to keep their business open, in order to keep their stockholders happy. But in your book, you say these decisions need to be ethical decisions. What does that mean, ethical decision-making?
So ethical decision-making are doing the right thing. Now, doing the right thing, I've defined in the book as following the Catholic idea, which, of course, is the Catholic social doctrine, the natural law idea, plus the virtues. And those three elements come together very nicely in determining specific objectives that a business should put together as values for their business.
Objectives, not goals.
Well, it's I don't know. I don't want to say that's not goals. I think values is probably the better statement, because I'm not suggesting that they're end things. They're values, things that we are oriented towards and trying to achieve.
Another company, the Wine Group. This company at one point you write about was a failing business, and now it's one of the largest wine producers. Its Franzia brand, which is a leading box wine brand, ranks among the top sellers in the U.S. market. Give us a little insight into that and why.
So Art Sioka was the gentleman that led a leveraged buyout of this firm. It was part of a larger corporation. And very early on, he told all the employees and all of the folks that were involved in the business that we're not going to do the political thing. And the political thing to him, the way he defined it, is doing the things that corporate wants you to do so that some corporate vice president gets the bonus that year or whatever it is, Don't do the political thing. We're going to do the right thing. And then he explains that very quickly, early on, they had a batch of product that didn't quite meet the standards that they had hoped to meet for the product that they sold. And so there was a question, do we throw this out and lose a whole bunch of money at a time when we really need money? Or do we, my gosh, stand by the standards we've set and not sell this product? Mm-hmm. And Art says, we're not going to sell it. And that then became kind of a rallying cry for all of the managers, and it became the kind of story that was told over and over again as new employees would join the company.
Became
you
lore.
Do the right thing, you don't do the political thing.
Mm-hmm. Finally, before we go, before we begin the question and answer period, my favorite part of the book are these questions for reflections, as I mentioned earlier. And at the end of each one, you say, well, now it's your turn, and here's what you can do and what you can reflect upon afterward. What would you like the audience to reflect upon as they leave here this evening?
So what I'd like you to do is think about what's been said tonight and think about the idea that there is a Catholic mind about business. And think then, are there things that I can do differently in my work that can somehow make the job better, make my relationships work more effectively with my coworkers, or make this company that I work for, this business that I work for, somehow do a better job of doing the common good. In other words,
force for good.
Become a force for good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Dr. Bryan.
Thank you.
So we have time for one or two questions. If you have a question, raise your hand, and I'll bring the mic to you. Just as a little tidbit, this mic is on, and we are recording through it. So even if you don't hear yourself in the room talking through the mic, it is on. I just want to let you know.
Thank you, Rosemary. And thank you both for the great interview. I have two questions related to two stories you shared. I believe the ones on page 4 and page 12.
Okay.
I actually find it very easy to make those ethical decisions when I have colleagues or business partners who have totally immoral and clearly unethical practices. Do you have any stories about when you had to part ways with someone who was maybe previously a friend, became a colleague, and then after you hired them, you had to fire them for a different decision, maybe related to performance or something else? And then the one on page 12, the story about your dad. I'm curious if you could flesh that out a little more, because I'm actually not convinced that I or any of us would want to live in a world where every salesman had that standard. For instance, if you went to every tie store in the DMV and they said, Professor Bryan, we would love to sell you a tie that matches your book for this great event you're about to go to, but we know you have 10 ties, and it would only take you $2 to fix up this other one. When does it border on being too paternalistic for them to say, the customer is not always right, and we won't sell you that?
Okay, great. And I'll address that part, the second question first. What I was trying to point out in this thing is that it's very important to be honest with your customer. And if you believe that they don't need it, I think it's appropriate to tell them. I think the other part that this story went on in the book was to say that, my dad developed this tremendous reputation in the community for being an honest and effective, dealer. And consequently, people really did trust him, and people were keep coming back to him to buy because of the fact that he had definite ideas of what value represented, and he would try to put his mind into the customer's mind and advise them effectively about what he thought would be the best value for them in their particular need. And I think that's what I was trying to get across in that story. Now, your first question about a situation where I had to fire someone, I would say that fortunately, I have not been in too many situations where I had to fire people. And I think in most of those situations, we were able to work through challenges where there was employee performance that wasn't very good, and then somehow work out some kind of a deal where we either move them into a job that they can do effectively, or put them in a situation where they realize that they need to go on and go to a different company in a different environment. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
We have time for one more question.
So I don't work for a business, but I work for the government. And you mentioned that...
I think that's a business, isn't it? A big business, yes.
Sometimes that's priority similar to a business. But you mentioned that we have to focus on concepts that are familiar to us in the Catholic tradition, such as the common good and the word virtue. Those words don't occur very much in modern discourse, especially not in government circles. How would you translate those principles into a language that I guess people in my field would be able to understand and apply in their daily routine? Thank you.
That's a great question, and it's one that I think that we all struggle with, those of us who might be dealing with non-Catholics. A Catholic mind that's, dealing with a non-Catholic mind. And I don't mean to be, it's the common terminology and issues, because let's face it, the church has this crazy Latin language, and everything has a Latin root, and some of the terms that we use are crazy. But at any rate. So what I do in the book, I talk about 4 alternate terms for those 4 things, and these are the way that you can basically talk to a broad audience. And of course, in the human dignity, I talk about the people first principle, because in effect that's what it is, and that's a term that people first. Yeah, I can understand that. I can relate to that. I don't have to think human dignity. Wait a minute, that was the abortion thing, right? Human dignity as applied to a business has to do with the people first principle, putting people first. The solidarity idea is all about teamwork, working with the other folks on the team, and in the larger sense, the larger team. And then subsidiarity has to do with personal responsibility, so I use that term. And then stewardship really does fit nicely with common good. So if you use those 4 terms when you're dealing with a non-Catholic audience, I think you can convey the idea of what we're talking about very effectively. Well, thank you. Is that where we are on the time?
Yeah, I have a few closing remarks. If you have a question that you didn't get to answer, I'm sure that Dr. Brian or that Lauren would be willing to answer the question afterwards. I also want to thank everyone for joining us tonight and give a special guest to our 2 speakers. It often seems like we hear a new story every day of how big bad business tramples over the little man. It is refreshing and encouraging to see what those within our community are doing to encourage ethical and integrity-infused business models. So thank you again, Dr. Brian. I'd also like to give a thanks to Dr. Andrew Abella as well, who speaks to this topic.